Welcome everyone. I'm Steve Ducker. I'm the editor of Demolition and Recycling International, and I'll be moderating this discussion for you today. I'd like to thank everyone who's taken the time to register. We do have over 200 people signed up for this event. We do appreciate this level of support, and we know how difficult things can be in the industry just now. Before I introduce you to the panelists, I'd like to take a moment to say thank you to our sponsors today, and they are Kyverco Recycling Plant, Matic Machinery Technology, and Terry Irving Business Generation. And you can see their logos along with those of KHL and Demolition and Recycling International on the screen behind me. Many thanks indeed to all of our sponsors. The format for today is straightforward. There'll be a discussion of around 30 to 35 minutes with our panelists, and then there'll be 10 to 15 minutes of questions, and we invite you in the audience to submit questions as well. You can ask a question at any time. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Just click on that, type into the box, and I will try to ask as many questions as possible on your behalf. But remember, the important thing is you don't have to wait for the question and answer part of the event. You can ask the question anytime. So let's meet the panelists, and it's my great pleasure to introduce firstly Jacqueline O'Donovan, who's Managing Director of the United Kingdom-based recycling company, O'Donovan Waste Disposal. Also Mazen Al-Rafai, who is Technical Director of End-to-End Waste Management Specialist of ERDA, which is based in the United Arab Emirates. And finally, Bill Turley, who's the Executive Director of the USA's Construction and Demolition Recycling Association. Welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us, and let's get underway. So as mentioned previously, the title of the webinar is Construction and Demolition Waste, Recycling in the 2020s. Before we get too far into the future, perhaps I could start by asking each of you to summarise the sector as it stands at the moment from your point of view, and to consider its immediate prospects, particularly taking into account COVID-19. I apologise for bringing it up in the first question, but for instance, do you see demolition companies looking to maximise revenues from projects and aiming to maybe consider recycling in more detail? Perhaps Jacqueline, you might like to start us off on this one, please.
Yeah, hi Steve, hi everybody. I think it's particularly tough at the moment for the demolition industry, especially in the UK. I think probably the second quarter of next year, they'll be extremely busy, but at the moment I think people are nervous, they don't know what's happening with COVID. So I don't see people wanting to adopt new recycling methods for the better sustainability, for the circular economy or anything like that. I think it's going to be a case of let's get this job done in and out as quick as we can, as safe as we can, to make it as profitable as we can in the current climate.
Bill, you're the Executive Director of a trade association in a large country. Is this what you've been experiencing as well?
I don't disagree with Jacqueline at all about whether recycling will remain important or not. It will, of course. It depends, again, if it's cheaper or easier or anything like that. What we're going to see here in the States, as she said, second quarter, I don't disagree with that as well. What we saw, and we're still seeing the tons coming into our recycling facilities. We're still seeing homes building very strong here in the States. Not so much for commercial as you might expect, but you know what the problem is in a few months out, there's not a lot of contracts coming on for construction, which means, you know, you need the demolition for that, of course. So we're not seeing contracts in a few months. It's going to might get a little bit racy in the next few months because according to the American Institute of Architects, which tracks billings of, a contract signed for architecture, which is a leading indicator of construction projects, that's way down. And it will be down. It's been down for a while, so I'm not sure what business we're going to have over here in the next few months. But after that, second quarter of next year, I could see it coming back.
Thanks, Bill. Mazen, you're operational on 3 continents. What's your view, please?
Far from that, even in a quite developing area, but we are actually quite lucky to have some big projects coming on. Which are mainly construction. They will shed a lot of construction waste, but at the end, it's also about profitability. But then COVID security, because now everyone is afraid of having more people on the lines, having more sorting. How do you manipulate the waste? Waste, which was never considered as, a little bit hazardous or contagious, now became a little bit more scary to handle. So these are being taken care into consideration now, and everyone has to be safe while handling this material.
Okay, well, just to break off, we have our first audience question. It's timed at 3:06 p.m, so thank you for getting that in so promptly. The question is, I would like to ask the panel what they think of future prospects of recycling in view of the modern methods of construction that are coming on stream. Bill, perhaps you'd like to comment on that from a US point of view?
We got a half an hour. This is a very good question because of the materials that are currently being used. One of the favorites of the modern architectural movement is the use of these laminated boards, all right? That, you see them laminated and they want to be able to reuse them later on. You know what we do with those when we get them in our recycling yards? We throw them away. The same with the Trex, which is a deck board that is made of plastics and recycled wood, recycled plastic and recycled wood. You know what we do with those when we get them in our recycling yards? We throw them away. I think that's one of the techniques, one of the problems we're going to have in the future is what can we recycle from this material? We can all recycle the concrete. We can all figure out something with wood and drywall and stuff like that. But some of these new materials are going to present a challenge to recyclers, I feel. I'm sure in the States, and I wouldn't doubt elsewhere in the world.
Mazen, same question to yourself, please.
Automation will actually change things a little bit because the different types of waste in construction, actually we construct differently in different areas in the world. We use concrete here, we use styrofoam filled concrete, we don't use shingles, we don't have bricks. So it's a different type of waste. And then the recycling is the same thing. Machinery can be quickly adapted to these things, and lines can be adjusted. But it is also, having more technology, able to do this. We looked actually at even robotics at one time, and I think that would be the future, and especially in construction, demolition, sorting.
Jacqueline, what's your take on modern methods of construction?
I agree with both Bill and Mazen. I think robotics is the way forward. I'm aware that out in the UAE, they do things totally different to how we do in the UK. I do think, I'm with Bill, that there is far too much choice with regards to construction, which then poses a challenge for us when we're trying to recycle, reuse. I do think that the demolition side of the industry needs to be brought into the BIM model, and it needs to be a section within the building information model, which it isn't at the moment, and therefore products discussion would be right at the onset, as opposed to at the moment. I think any construction client that wants to build something, if there's something already on the plot of land, the demolition is considered more a nuisance than anything else, and it's let's get it demolished, let's get it out the way, and then everything else kicks in. Well, I think demolition needs to be brought into the fold and brought into the thought process at the start of a project.
Okay, well, thank you for that. In terms of audience questions, we have another one, and it says that with robotics, it takes lots of pre-processing to get materials set up properly for robotic sorting, which is a heavy capital investment. So it's more of a comment than a question, really, but perhaps you'd like to add to or provide some further comment on that.
Will's right. You know, it is a big capital investment, but the trick is the AI, and I think that everyone knows it. You've got to be able to recognize the material. Robots can pick anything. You got to same with the optical sorters. You know, it's all the AI. If you recognize this stuff, you can do a better job with it. So I do think that robotics are the future for us. They do need a lot of attention, but once they work, they could be the future for us. I don't think anyone can disagree with that one. You know, doesn't take a break, doesn't get mad at its girlfriend and show up mad at work. Or I mean, these things work really well.
Okay, would anyone else like to chip in on this question about robotics, please?
I totally agree with Bill. It's definitely the way forward. However, I think, especially being London-based, the challenge it poses to us is the actual space that the whole operation takes up. So for the robots to identify the waste, the waste can't be up on top of each other. So in London and most of the cities really in the UK, it's very hard. You know, space is premium, so it would work in large scale sorting operations, but in smaller London operations, it poses a real challenge to us. So we're looking at going one on top of the other as opposed to going as a line. So yeah, it has added challenges for London market.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So if I can move on to possible changes in legislation to perhaps push companies towards cleaner and greener projects in the 2020s. Mazen, some of the markets that you're operating in are probably offering the steepest learning curve to customers, but also the biggest opportunity to yourselves. Do you think there will be any sort of need for government intervention in those markets, given how relatively new the recycling concept there is?
There is always a need for government interventions. The more regulation they put on, especially the reuse of material, forcing a little bit the consultants to include that reuse, it will help us a lot to produce recycled material that can be reused. So that's a cycle that we cannot neglect. Otherwise, the waste will always be produced. We can recycle it, but then we will have a big stock that no one wants to use. We've seen that in the past, but luckily there are a lot of governments, official and semi-official interventions that actually pushes the developers and the consultants to reuse that secondary material in their construction. Other than that, the other types of waste, packaging, plastics, wood, and all of that is being properly disposed of or recycled or actually reused, because most of the wood is being reused. There are small activities which even on site try to reuse, because these are big development projects, some of the woods by actually reducing the size or remanaging it to a different size and including it in the resources for construction immediately. This is when you work with large projects, you only need a little bit of the government intervention, setting ground to allowing that reuse and forcing it a little bit, and then you're okay, and you can produce as much as aggregate as you want in the different categories, but they have actually to be quite clean in order to be accepted by the consultant. So the consultant become rather a little bit more strict in accepting this material because they are being forced as well.
Bill, can you give the North American view, please?
Yeah, well, and thank you. Yeah, I like what he said about, you know, the deleterious allowances on aggregate. Yeah, we get the same thing over here, man. You know, 1% or less requirement on deleterious. I expect that to stay that way too, and strict. Excuse me. Some of the things that I see that have happened over here is one interesting one is the city of Palo Alto in California, which is very liberal, very progressive, where Stanford University is, instituted a deconstruction policy, no more demolition. You must deconstruct every building there, which is, you know, how can you do that? I mean, you know, will that happen? And I will tell you that there just might be a few trucks going at 2 in the morning out to the landfills out of Palo Alto, because, you know, you can't just deconstruct everything, okay? So but I think that is something big that deconstruction, you know, is going to try to put, you know, be a requirement, I think, in some parts of North America. I'm not sure elsewhere. The two other things is LEED. It will come back. I think that their requirements are going to get tighter for the recycling industry. I know they're going to get tighter, because we talk to them all the time about fixing the recycling credits. There's going to be more requirements for certification. And as cities and counties and even states adopt LEED requirements or push for LEED requirements on construction projects, that will affect recycling as well, and the demolition industry quite a bit, obviously. And finally, abating for gypsum. What I mean by that is that drywall in our loads messes everything up. It contaminates the wood. It you know, just falls apart and ruins recyclable loads, or it can anyway. We are not pushing, but we are suggesting that when a demolition project takes place, and this already happens in British Columbia, that they abate for the drywall. They remove the drywall the same they do with lead and asbestos and other contaminants, and just set it aside. It makes it easier to recycle, and it doesn't break it up and ruin the rest of the loads. I would not be surprised, and that is getting pushed by some cities and LEED going forward. So, you know, I told demolition contractors about this once, and one of the first thing they said is, "What? That's stupid." Then they said, "Hey, I can charge for that." So, you know, there's a way to, you know, make this work, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that idea becoming more popular.
Thanks, Bill. Jacqueline, as a company based in the UK, you could be looking into the future, not just at changes in the industry, but also to post-Brexit Britain. How do you see 10 years ahead when you're looking towards the 2030s and the regulatory framework that you could be in then?
Well, I would hope that the industry takes on board what's best for the environment and what's best with regards to recycling. We wouldn't need legislation. I can't see that happening. Here in the UK, we're currently only using between 23 and 25% of recycled aggregates on any site. And I think that comes down to the lack of knowledge by the people that start the projects, rolling the consultants, the quantity surveyors, the people that are specifying the material. And I think they need to be educated. And it brings me back to BIM again, that I think that if demolition was brought into the start of the program, they would think about what they can actually do with that building at the end, whilst they're constructing the new one. Because at the moment, I think it's construct a new one, don't worry about where it's going at the end, or 20 or 30 years, we're not going to worry about what we've got to do with it. You know, there has to be a massive drive for the use of recycled material in the UK, and I would hope legislation, because we are wrapped in legislation so tightly over here in the UK, I would hope it wouldn't come to that, but I can't see any other way, to be honest, that it would work. What I wouldn't want to see happening is the car crash we've got with plastics. So we've got 50 strains of plastic, and it's been left now to the recycling companies to try and sort out what we can do with all the different plastics, when in fact it should have been sorted out at the beginning, and that many strains of plastic shouldn't have been allowed to be produced. So it was putting the cart before the horse there. So I would hope we wouldn't have the same scenario.
Okay, well, thank you for that. We've got audience questions coming in from all directions at the moment, so if we can just catch up with a few of those. Here's one. We do see more and more construction with carbon fibre concrete. Does this new material require a specific sorting or recycling process, or can we use the material as today, in quotes, the standard concrete? I'll open that one up to the floor, but maybe Bill, you might have a view on it.
Yeah, I've not really seen any problems with it, but you know, I haven't seen a lot of it in here yet, and usually it's going to be newer, so we're not going to get it for a while. But you know, I would like to hear from somebody. Actually, I would like to hear from somebody if they've ever seen it as a problem. I've not heard it as a problem here.
For that, about
Yes.
C&D separation into different streams. So because we are collecting, we're actually controlling the collection and the location, the collection points of the different projects. We advise them to make even more than 4 streams on each collection point. We want to collect concrete and rubble alone. We want to collect steel and pipes and all of that alone, and then packaging alone. Then everything related to food and stuff, we just leave that. We actually put banners and all kinds of stuff and in different languages, so people will deposit their residual waste, their food waste in different bins, separate than the construction waste, because that's really our nightmare as a contaminant in the construction waste. You don't want waste that smells at the end in your construction line. So even the construction waste is more than 4 different elements. And we force them to do that because we want to have a zero waste to landfill at the end. So we have to get their help in order to do that. If we get everything mixed, it's not going to separate easily. We're going to get rejects from all sides, and we get contamination from different material, especially composite material. That what they were saying, we get a lot of composite material. But then, if it's at the beginning separated, at least we can manage that quite, you know, manually and a little bit with the help of the operators, we can manage that.
Okay, well, there was actually a further question about how does the panel see the future of wet processing in C&D recycling, and that's quite a big subject in some areas of the industry just now. So would anyone like to comment on that, please?
I'm a little confused. What do you mean by wet processing, such as the washing systems for C&D or for fines, that kind of stuff?
Sort of thing, yeah.
Yeah, but the issue that for us in the States has been, I mentioned drywall, is the drywall in our mixed C&D plant fines. The problem has been the drywall to run it through those kind of systems. Apparently it clogs it up, which is another reason why we should get the drywall out of there. But for I think that I've seen one of those systems work, and they're especially for concrete fines, and they're awesome, wonderful systems. I think they can work, but you know, for right now, I don't think they can do mixed C&D fines in the United States because of our drywall.
Totally opposite end of the spectrum now in terms of the subject, but does the panel believe that governments globally have the technical knowledge to legislate on the reuse of recycled products? Do you think, or do you see the appetite for them to learn and legislate accordingly?
I don't think they do. You know, if we look at our UK government, I think, and I stand to be corrected, but I think there's one person in the government that's actually ran a business, which I think is astounding. I'm not even going to go into your government, Bill, because you could be Christmas. But I think more business people need to be brought into Parliament to make legislation, or Parliament needs to come out to more businesses to get a better idea of the challenges and the pitfalls, etc.
Yes. That's all I'm going to say about our government too, Jacqueline.
Okay, well, we'll move on from that one to a question about machinery. And again, we've sort of touched on this already, but maybe there's a possibility to expand. The question is, if you're looking at the future, how is the machinery market looking? Autonomous, fully automated, diesel engine driven, electric driven? Is there a demand for low noise machines? I think we all know from earlier how we'd like it to look, but is that a realistic view of how it could look?
I think it has to be, because, you know, we're legislated by the Environment Agency, and they're obviously being pushed by the government for lower carbon, lower NOx, lower PMs. So constantly, you know, in my 33 years, I've never seen the charge as heavy as it is over the last probably couple of years, including whilst in COVID, the push to make things cleaner, less pollutant. So yeah, I do think the machinery companies need to spend more time with clients and find out again what demands are on us as recyclers, for them to be able to create the ideal machine. I've never yet been approached by a machine manufacturer to say, you know, you've got that bit of kit outside the window, but, you know, if you could change it or tweak it, or if you had a magic wand, what would you do with it? That's never happened in my 33 years.
Mazen, you're at the newer end of the market. What's your view, please?
On the pollution side, although we operate in quite big, large areas where we have nothing standing for probably 50 kilometers, we are really asked about the environmental impact in very little details. So noise pollution, air pollution, dust, even, you know, light pollution during the night operation, where actually these are very stringent requirements that we are operating in. And we have to abide, using actually a consultant to abide by very strict environmental norms, because the projects that we work on are very high level. They're quite environmentally friendly. They want to have a positive impact rather than a negative impact on the environment. And this is why they apply these stringent norms. And we have to comply. It's not very difficult if you apply the right equipment and the right operation methodology. That's what makes it different than the regular processing.
Yeah, as far as becoming more automated, I mean, yes, of course, our recycling plants are becoming more automated as well. But I still will see a future for the dump and picks. I mean, you know, you can't always afford a $10 million plant in Montana, or, you know, which is a very rural area or something like that. It just doesn't work for our points. So, I mean, I could still see that we will, and as far as noise, we're being driven, and many of our mixed recycling plants are being made to go indoors, which is quite an expense. And that's a big deal for us. I imagine over in London, it's like, you're laughing probably, because of course we have to be indoors, but no, you know, not everywhere here, it's required and becoming more required to do that to protect against noise and dust and that kind of thing as well. And by the way, as far as regulation, I forgot to mention that the state of New Jersey is going to pass a law that will require all facilities that are under permit to go under review every 5 years for environmental justice. And if you don't know that whole scenario, it's, you know, it's a kind of a reaction against putting these waste facilities in lower income neighborhoods. And so they're going to have to be reviewed on environmental justice standards every 5 years, waste and recycling facilities, along with other polluters, so-called polluters. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic as far as, you know, what you were talking about, Mason, as far as the what's happening in the neighborhood and what you're sharing with. So we'll have to be more careful with our facilities if those kind of laws continue to be passed.
Okay, thank you. Another audience question for all the panelists, although I think going by earlier answers, Jacqueline might fancy first go at this one. The question is, how can our industry get involved with BIM and change the legislation? Hazardous waste such as asbestos, with regard to landfill and the issue of running out of landfill sites, also the potential of closed asbestos landfill sites being developed. Are there any views about new technologies for the destruction of asbestos? So maybe Jacqueline, you could start from BIM and take it from there.
So BIM, I think the NFDC, the National Federation of Demolition Contractors, is the first stop to find out how it can be included or what waves they're making in that area. As for asbestos, yeah, we're reduced to a handful of disposal sites. I don't know of any technologies for deconstruction of it at present. I can't think that we'd have too much more of it left now, because we've been aware of it for so many years. I think that when the asbestos laws changed X amount of years ago, I think it was a case of ripping it out then if we had some of it and getting rid of it. So I don't see that being a major issue in the UK. And then it goes on to say about drywall products. So British Gypsum come and collect their waste back again. We can give it back to them and they reprocess it. So that's me.
Bill, what's the US view on BIM and what the industry can make of it?
If she's talking about expanded producer responsibility, that's going to be quite a fight. I mean, if you're going to try to get the drywall manufacturers to take their product back, I wish you the best of luck, because it ain't going to happen here, or not willingly. They're not going to. They're getting to realize that they have a problem, but they're not going to be able to bring that one back. I don't think.
Really, repurposing, designing for repurposing is a key in helping control that amount of construction waste. But who's gonna be willing to do that, and how will it be applied is a big question, because products are free on the market. You have innovations every day that actually mixes up material instead of keeping them separate, which makes it more difficult for us. We lately saw more incorporation of plastics inside the concrete, which makes it a nightmare to separate plastic from concrete. So once you are doing the crushing, you start finding styrofoam flying over everywhere, and then small pieces of plastic, being shredded with the concrete. This is the innovation in construction. If we have to consider that it has to be repurposed, then we have to reconsider everything in the whole process, and that's not easy. So now even the crushed material will be fed into the process line in order to separate this plastic out of that. You cannot just put it on the ground and start looking for the plastic. So you need a mechanism to do that. Yes, there is an easier way in the deconstruction. So if we do deconstruction, that would ease up things. So you have to strip the house completely, and that's good repurposing. Other than that, reusing parts of that, it's quite a challenging task in the future even.
But Mason, you have to, today modern construction techniques, when they're using at least with wood, okay, I'm talking wood, what adhesives to hook the wood together without the nails and all that, you cannot deconstruct that. That's modern construction techniques will have to change if we want to repurpose the building or deconstruct it or something like that.
That's exactly what I meant. We have to change the whole process, the whole technology, in order to meet that. Otherwise, it doesn't work. You cannot have combined material and then say the same equipment will separate that. It's not going to work. So it makes our life more difficult. And this is the future of construction. So what would be the future of recycling? Then it has to totally develop as well.
We have to evolve, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, panelists. A question I'd like to bring up is about emerging markets, and Mazen in particular. I guess they don't come much more emerging than the Middle East and parts of Africa. Where do you see the major opportunities, and what are the differences in attitudes to construction waste and demolition waste recycling in the various parts of the world that you operate in?
We have seen things change from a lot of light tipping, happening everywhere in the different countries that we work on. And from there, so we had quite big areas with fly tipping of construction waste specifically. And now you see that there are legislation, there is follow-up, there is enforcement of channeling that into at least construction waste landfills, where there will be people coming in to sort out the different recyclable material, and then opportunity to invest and install recycling facilities. We have seen that in different areas, and we were lucky to actually win a project where we can include that part in that project as a requirement. And we will be sorting out all the construction waste and not depositing anything in the landfills. But there is a tendency specifically into being more environmentally friendly. So LEED is being applied, SIDAMA is being applied, all of these different government pushed requirements are being forced into developers to have a positive, as I said before, environmental impact footprint instead of creating more landfills and creating more even noise pollution or dust. So we have to make sure that we also can accompany them into that path.
Bill, construction in the US never stops, and it's probably fair to say that work for demolition companies was quite good during 2019 at least. What areas of demolition do you think will provide the impetus?
Yeah. Over the years, I've watched as the demolition contractors, I've seen demolition contractors get more into recycling, obviously. A whole bunch of them own crushers at the very least. And, some of these guys have mixed C&D operations of their own to see as they expand into the area. I think where we're going to, but the challenge is if for anybody is the end markets. And if you got, I don't want to say anyone can collect it, but most anyone can collect it, most anyone can process it, but you need the end markets. And we need to develop more end markets. And I think that's where you're going to see emerging, expansion and all that. The guys who are going to do well are the ones who have expanded their markets. One of the ones that a demolition contractor did here with the concrete is a cement treated base. To increase, to make it a better base product for highways and stuff like that. I mean, I think developments like that, the use of shingles on gravel roads for dust control. And, we have a project going on with C&D fines, which we haven't talked about at all. I don't know. I'd love to hear what everyone else does with mixed C&D fines. We are mixing them with biochar to attenuate the hydrogen sulfide gas that's generated in the landfill environment, so we can use them for alternative daily cover. I mean, I think those are your emerging markets. As far as, yes, we can collect it. Yes, you can process this, but what are you going to do with it? So you need to expand your end markets. And I think that's important as we go forward with more recycling.
There was actually an audience question about what the UK does with its fines, so maybe there's someone out there sharing your interest on that one.
Some of the fines are actually mixed in the road base, in one of the layers of the road base. And it creates, because the fines are a base of concrete, so they create a stronger base over the rough aggregates that we use in some of the areas. Because when you are working with an area with a lot of sand, your base preparation is more important than anywhere else in the world. And you have to make sure that you have some structural material first, but then also you need to have some strength in the sub base that you have. This is why they use some of that fines mixed with other material and aggregates, fine aggregates, and then wet it during rolling to get a road base.
Yeah, the unhydrated cement makes it stronger. We have a different fines than you. It's ours is wood, ours has drywall, ours has, you name it, whatever's in that. It could have a little ceiling tile. Who knows what's in our C&D fines? That's why I was wondering. I wondered what Europe was doing.
No, we have fines. We have fines mainly from stones and concrete here.
Right, different fines.
So we have the fines that come off the crusher, and we sell that as a material for binding other materials. or we sell it for a road base, mix it with other materials. Then we have the fines that come off the picking line and the construction and demolition process. Pleased to say it's a Kyverco process. And we've got a flip-flop screener on there which separates, takes the wood and the paper out. So it leaves us a very fine inert soil with a bit of stone, a bit of grit more than stone in it. And then the landfills use that to engineer the cells for the food waste cells at the landfill. But, you know, I haven't mentioned landfill because we haven't been to a landfill in donkeys, because we've got a landfill tax of £94.15 per tonne, which keeps us away from the landfill.
Wow. If we had that, we'd have a lot more recycling over here, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And okay, well, we did market this as a 45-minute event, and I guess if it was a football match, the fourth official would be putting the board up soon, so I won't keep you too much longer. Perhaps if I could just ask one final question from me, which is, what would you like the audience to take away from this webinar about construction and demolition waste recycling in one short, concise message? Mazen, perhaps you'll like to go first.
We actually are looking at a surging market in construction and demolition. Luckily, we have big stocks of material standing there for years that needs to be segregated. It's mainly concrete and trucks and sand, but it is also a mix of other material, because a lot of the material is being segregated by people working on site. This is still a developing market in construction, demolition waste development. And we are in for it because the environmental regulations are pushing for a better development and a better outcome.
Jacqueline, please.
We're getting, it's squeezing, I think, in the UK. I think there's less and less people getting involved in this industry. The reason being because we're hit with legislation so hard between the environment, between logistics, between health and safety, labour markets, you name it. The challenges are getting more and more and more each and every day. So the word legislation just puts shivers down my back. But what would I like the people to take away? It's not as easy as it looks. We're doing a lot more than people know about. And that to leave, I suppose, for us, especially in London, leave the recycling to the experts. So my worst nightmare is a client that wants to recycle on site. So yeah, leave it to the experts.
The last word to you.
One thing I'd like to leave them with is the end markets that I harped upon earlier. Focus on that, and you will. Recycling isn't going to go away. Deconstruction isn't going to go away. So, but you need to focus on the end markets, even for deconstruction. I mean, how many people do want a 6-year-old toilet? I mean, and it's a very limited market for reuse. So you have to find the right end markets for all these materials, for the mix, for C&D, recycling, and also for reuse. So I think focus on end markets is the most important part of that we should, to expand recycling rates throughout the world, I would argue.
Okay, well, thank you, Bill. Thank you to all of our panelists once again for giving up your time today. It's been hugely thought-provoking. I'm sure there's a virtual round of applause going on around the planet for you just now. So thank you again. And thank you again to our event sponsors, Kyverco Recycling Plant, Matic Machinery Technology, and Terry Irving Business Generation. And thank you in particular to our audience for joining us, for your participation and for your questions. There will be a recording from today available soon, and you will receive an email of details of how to download that. So you can enjoy it at your leisure, pick out your favourite bits and watch it all over again. There's just one more announcement from me, which is a bit of a shameless plug really for the World Demolition Summit, which is another online event this year in just over 2 months' time. That's on the 12th of November at 3 p.m. UK time. It's a Thursday. If you've enjoyed today, why not register for that as well? There's full details online of the event, including how to register at www.demolitionsummit.com. So that's it from me. Thank you again for today. Please stay safe in these difficult times, and I hope to be speaking to you all again soon. Thank you.